Hello everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. So I don't even know what I'm gonna title this video, but I was messaging back and forth with Jess from Peace Love Books at some point last week, and we of course were discussing how disappointed we were in the list that Goodreads came out with for the Goodreads Choice Award for the category of romance. And so I messaged her at some point and I said, you know, you should do a video of books that you wish would be on this list of the best romances of 2022. And so then she messaged me a couple days ago asking if I would collab with her and do this same kind of video. So there's a couple of different ways that you could go about talking about this topic of, you know, books that should be the best romances of 2022. Since we are talking about like the Goodreads Choice Awards, their criteria, I believe, has to do with the number of ratings a given book has on Goodreads and like how many people have added these books to their shelves on Goodreads. So obviously because it's a Choice Awards, it has to do with the popularity, not necessarily what books are the absolute best. So I do have some books that I want to mention today that I think definitely should have been included in the initial round of the awards. Basically, Goodreads puts out a list of 20 books, I believe. Everybody votes on that. And then there are 10 books in the final rounds. And then, of course, at the end of that, there is one book that wins the category. So there are a couple of books that I haven't read yet, but I know they come from very popular authors and they have like thousands of ratings on Goodreads already. So I'm kind of surprised that these books didn't make the cut. And then the other books that I'm going to bring up in this video are just 2022 romances. Some of them are late 2021 releases because the criteria that Goodreads goes by is like November to November. So I do have a couple of books that fit like November, December of 2021. But yeah, these are all books that have come out in the past year that I have read and truly loved, that I just highly recommend, that I think are some of the absolute best romances to have been published this year. So without further ado, let's get on into it. So the first couple books I'm going to bring up are books that I know are fairly popular. I just looked these up on Goodreads and I do think they meet the criteria for being nominated in the romance category, but for whatever reason Goodreads left them out. The first one I'm going to bring up is Gracie Meets the Grump. Is that what it's called? By Mariana Zapata. So this book already has like 17,000 ratings on Goodreads. That is a lot for the romance category for sure. And Mariana Zapata, yes, she's an indie published author, though I know that Wall of Winnipeg and Me and All Roads Lead Here just got picked up by a publisher. I don't know if it was a major publisher or what, but her romances are self-published, indie published. But she has always been a very popular author in the romance community. Like ever since I started reading romance, people are always just raving and raving about her books, and for very good reason. I've read quite a few of her books at this point and have enjoyed all of them. So I'm kind of surprised. I'm gonna have to message Jess and Lacey about this because they're like the experts, I feel like, on the romance category of the Goodreads Choice Awards, but I don't think Mariana Zapata's books have ever made the nomination list, which I just think is crazy because, like I said, I know her books are very popular, but they are indie published, and as we know, for the most part, Goodreads just doesn't acknowledge indie published books. And then the other book that I was kind of surprised didn't make the list is Ruby Fever by Ilona Andrews. So there's a couple of reasons why I feel this should have been on the list. For one thing, I know that previous books in this series have made the nomination list. The previous book in the series, I think, is called like Emerald Blaze. That came out in 2020, and that book did make the list of, you know, the initial round, the 20 books. So I kind of just assumed that this book would make the cut as well. And if you don't know anything about the Hidden Legacy series, this is an urban fantasy romance series that has 6 books out. The first 3 books are its own trilogy, and then this 6th book, Ruby Fever, is the last book in the 2nd trilogy of the series. So I did look this up on Goodreads and I saw that this book has, I think, about 11,000 ratings. So this series and this author duo, they're very much still pretty popular, and this is traditionally published. I'm pretty sure, yeah, this is from Avon. So, I mean, I'm not shocked that this didn't end up making the list just because of the direction that I feel the traditionally published romance industry is going. But I would have liked to have seen something like this, an urban fantasy romance, make the list. So now we're going to get into books that I have read this year that I just think are really great romances that I wish would have been seriously considered for this category. But at the same time, I know that quite a few of these books just aren't very popular. So when we're talking about a choice awards, like, it makes sense that these books didn't make the cut, but I just think that they're really great romances that came out in the past year. So I just personally highly, highly recommend them. So first up, I have some historical romances that I'll bring up. So the thing with the Goodreads Awards, they hardly ever put a historical romance on the list. The only historical I have ever seen since I've started keeping up with these awards is when Lisa Kleypas comes out with a historical, which is really unfortunate because as much as I love Lisa Kleypas, she is not the only historical romance author out there. I just think that these historical romances are fantastic and I highly recommend them. First up, we have The Lady Temps and Heir by Harper St. George. This is book 3 in her Gilded Age Heiresses series. This is a fake engagement romance between Max, who is an American. This series takes place in Gilded Age London. And then we have Lady Helena, our heroine, and basically they go into this fake engagement because it would benefit the both of them to be engaged to someone because of their career aspirations, things like that. While this was not a 5-star read for me, I still think it was a very solid installment to the series. I love what Harper St. George is doing with this series. I think it has a unique vibe in terms of the historical romance genre because you don't see a ton of Gilded Age romances, and I haven't read many Gilded Age romances that take place in London. I've read quite a few that take place in New York because of Joanna Shoup. But yeah, this is just a really great series. I highly recommend The Devil and the Heiress, which is book 2. That's my personal favorite of the series. I gave that one 5 stars, but that did not come out in the past year, so that's why I'm not mentioning it. Next up, I mean, you knew this author was gonna show up. Speaking of, we have The Bride Goes Rogue by Joanna Shoup, and this cover matches my sweater today. I'm here for that. But this is book 3 in her Fifth Avenue Rebels series. I feel like Joanna Shoup is truly in her writing prime right now. We all know, I feel like the whole world knows at this point how much I love The Lady Gets Lucky, which was the last installment in this series that came out last year. And I feel like this book was almost just as good as The Lady Gets Lucky. But this is a hate-to-love romance between Catherine and Preston. Basically, their fathers made a deal that at some point Catherine and Preston would get married, so an arranged marriage situation, but Preston's father passed away some years before the book started, so he felt that that deal was null and void. But Catherine shows up at his office expecting to have this marriage go through. He rejects her, so there's a hate to love dynamic, and there's all kinds of shenanigans in this book, but this is truly, I think, the hottest romance that Joanna Shoup has ever written. We know that Joanna Shoup is the queen of writing a good carriage scene. It's definitely one of those in here, and there's also like a masked ball tryst in this towards the beginning. And of course there's plenty of angst. There is a lot of groveling involved that Preston, our hero, does towards the end of this book. Like, what's not to love? It's Joanna Shoup. Incredible. Then we have one of my top favorite historical romances that I've read this year that I'm pretty sure will end up in my top 10 historical romances of 2022, and that is After Dark with the Duke by Julianne Long. This is book 4 in her Palace of Rogues series. This is phenomenal. we have a heroine who is an opera singer, and she's brought low when these two men fight a duel over her. So she has no choice but to stay at the Grand Palace on the Thames, which is this boarding house that this series centers around. And then we have James, I believe is his name, yes, who is the Duke of Valkirk, pictured here. And he's also staying at the boarding house, and he at first just judges Marianne very harshly for what happened to her and her life choices and all of that. And so this is definitely a hate to love romance as well. This is a hate to friends to lovers romance, which I just love that vibe, because eventually he agrees to tutor her in the Italian language, because opera singers, we sing in Italian a lot, and it's really helpful if you understand what you're singing. And so he tutors her, and they become friends through that, and then something more. There's also an age gap between the two of them. I think he's in his early 40s, she's in her mid 20s, and this was phenomenal. I cried. This is the second book I have read by Julianne Long that has made me cry. Next up, we have another historical that I think may end up in my top 10 historical romances of 2022 as well. This is A Daring Pursuit by Kate Bateman. This is a phenomenal, I would say, frenemies to lovers romance. Clearly, I've been reading a lot of like enemies to lovers romances this year. Now that I'm talking about all of them in a row. But this one is from the Ruthless Rival series. It's book 2, and this one centers around Karis, who is a Davies, and then Tristan, who is a Montgomery. The Davies and the Montgomerys are feuding families. They've been feuding for like hundreds of years, so it kind of has Romeo and Juliet vibes in that way. But their feud is definitely more lighthearted than in Romeo and Juliet. But yeah, they have just kind of hated each other their whole lives, but they have this undeniable chemistry, and this was just such a fun time, so well paced. I think this is my favorite book by Kate Bateman that I've read so far. She's incredible at writing amazing banter. Some of the best banter that I've ever read has come from Kate Bateman's books. So for that alone, I highly recommend checking out her books. But this is also the sexiest romance that I've read from Kate Bateman, because this involves a deal that Karis and Tristan make where Karis has only had one other lover before, and he didn't give a shit about her pleasure, so she thinks that sex is overrated. And so Tristan is like, let me show you how good sex can be. So we have a couple more historical romances left. I have A Lady for a Duke by Alexis Hall. By the way, I did a reading vlog where I binged this book, A Daring Pursuit, and The Bride Goes Rogue, because all of these books came out on the same day, May 24th. So I'm gonna link that vlog up in the cards above, because I had so much fun binging all 3 of these books. I gave all 3 of them 5 stars. Like, you can just see in that vlog that I'm just so happy with what I'm reading. So this is quite the unique historical romance that I really would have liked to have seen make the Goodreads Choice Awards. Like, if there was one historical romance that I really would have liked to have seen on that list, it would have been this one, because there's some great diversity in this. We have Viola, who is a trans heroine, but also this is just a unique historical romance, and the way that the story is told, the writing is stunning. I think Alexis Hall wrote the shit out of this book. And it's just something that I haven't really seen from the genre before, so I really would have liked to have seen this make the list. And it has a decent amount of ratings, considering that it's a historical romance. I think it has like 7,000 ratings, so, you know. But this is the angstiest of angsty childhood friends to lovers romances, where we have Viola, our heroine, who was in the Battle of Waterloo with Justin, pictured here, the Duke of Gracewood. She was presumed dead after that battle, and because of that, she can now live her life as a woman, and she is now the lady's companion to Louise, who is her sister-in-law. And so through different circumstances, Viola and Justin come back into each other's lives, and this was just beautiful. This is definitely more of a character-driven romance, definitely slower paced, know that going in. It's like 450 pages, like, be patient. But the epilogue of this lives in my head rent-free. It is absolutely stunning. Stunning. Just a beautiful historical romance that I highly, highly recommend. Let's see, I think I have a couple more historicals left. I really enjoyed the 2 historicals that Eva Lee came out with this year. So the first one is A Good Girl's Guide to Rakes, which is book 1 in her Last Chance Scoundrels series. This one is a really fun rake meets wallflower romance. We kind of have like a lessons in seduction vibe going on as well, where Kieran, our hero, is showing Celeste, the heroine, the fun and scandalous side of London after dark. And this one to me was just so fun, and it is low angst, but I really loved that. Like, we love a couple that just clearly communicates with each other, and this was just a really sweet and sexy romance. And then I also read How the Wallflower Was Won, which is book 2 of this series. What was it? I think last month I read this, and I might have loved this even more than book 1, which is surprising because I wasn't all that excited going into this one because I'm just desperate for book 3, which is going to be Dom and Willa's book. But this one is a marriage of convenience between Tabitha and Finn. And Finn also has a learning disability. It seems that he has dyslexia, though of course back then they didn't know what that was. Whereas Tabitha is a scholar. And so we definitely have like an opposites attract vibe. And just like with book 1, we love a hero with just a filthy mouth. Like, Eva Lee knows how to write spicy scenes, and I also just connected with both of these couples. I just highly recommend these historical romances. So let's quickly go through some contemporary romances. We have The Mistletoe Motive by Chloe Leese. This came out late November 2021. This is a Christmas romance novella. The audiobook is like just about 5 hours. And this is just a really wonderful and funny and sweet enemies to lovers romance between Jonathan and Gabriella. This definitely has a You've Got Mail vibe. So they work together at a bookshop, and then they have been, I guess, like instant messaging back and forth, like from a forum, like an internet forum or something. So it's one of those things where they don't know who each other is, so they're falling in love on the internet, and in real life they just bicker and banter. This has some great representation as well. I know the heroine is demisexual, and either the hero and heroine or both of them are neurodivergent, and I can't remember who it was. It might be both of them. I don't know, but this was fabulous. I thought this was really, really well done. Definitely one of my top favorite romances from Chloe Leese. We have Always Practice Safe Hex by Juliet Cross. I mean, come on. Anytime Juliet Cross comes out with a book, especially in this series, it's gonna make my list of my favorite releases of the year. And this is Gareth and Livy's romance, which again, this has a wonderful enemies to lovers vibe, kind of more like business rivals to lovers vibe. And Gareth is a Grim Reaper and Livy is a witch. And Gareth is just, oh boy, he's hot. Like, it's hard for me to decide like who the hottest hero of this series is, but like Gareth is definitely up there. He is something else. And the sex scenes in this were just chef's kiss, incredible. Juliet Cross knows what she's doing when it comes to steam, and there's also a really great emotional connection between these two characters, and I just really loved seeing their romance develop. Next up is a book that, if Goodreads would actually put indie romances on their list, I think that this book absolutely could have made the cut. That's Blindside by Candy Steiner. This book blew up on TikTok, just like quite a few of the other books that did make the list. This is a very popular book, and that's mainly because I feel like Candy Steiner just does a fantastic job of advertising her own books on TikTok and Instagram. And so that's why it did blow up on TikTok. And this is also the kind of romance that I feel like just appeals to a lot of romance readers. It's a new adult romance, it's a college sports romance, and we have lessons in seduction. It just ticks a lot of boxes for myself and a lot of other romance readers. Highly, highly recommend this one, by the way. It was really well done. Clay, the hero, can get it any day of the week, and I really loved Gianna, the heroine. I related to her a lot. I also have to bring up Flawless by Elsie Silver. I feel like this book really blew up, at least on like Romance Booktube and Bookstagram. I'm not sure about TikTok. And as we all know, TikTok seems to be like the place to have your book blow up nowadays. But this is a fantastic small town cowboy romance, specifically a bull rider romance, and this was hot as hell, and I was just sucked in from page 1. This one is kind of, I wouldn't say enemies to lovers, though that is how it's advertised. It's more like Rhett and the heroine, I can't remember her name, oops, they just don't like each other because Rhett is a bull rider who has had some scandals recently, and so our heroine ends up kind of babysitting him to make sure that he doesn't get into further trouble, and so they don't like each other at first. But this was fantastic, and I've heard nothing but incredible things about the sequel, which is Heartless, so I'm really hoping to read that one soon. There was Electric Idol by Katie Robert that did make the list. However, I personally would have preferred to see Wicked Beauty because I gave this book 5 stars. I gave Electric Idol 4 stars. I understand why that book made the list just because it came out in February, whereas this book came out just a few months ago. But this is a fantastic poly romance between, let's see, Helen, Achilles, and Patroclus. And this also has like a Hunger Games-esque tournament involved. Like, there's a lot going on, and I personally felt that it was all really well done. So for me, this is like leaps and bounds better than Electric Idol. But yeah, I just had a really fun time with this one. It definitely had a unique vibe to it. And then last but not least, I do want to give a shout out to 2 books that did make the list that I think truly deserve to be on that list. So first up is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. Usually when Abby Jimenez releases a book, it always makes the list, so I wasn't surprised to see this on the list, but I read this a few months ago and I gave it 5 stars. I absolutely loved this. This is a small town romance where we have Alexis, who is an older heroine. So we have an older heroine and a younger hero dynamic going on, and Daniel is the hero. And go into this knowing that there's no spice. It's all closed door. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that's just how it is. But it is a very well done small town romance. There's a lot of emotional things going on in this as well that I thought were really well done. So definitely deserves to be on the list. And then last but not least, we have Twisted Hate by Anna Huang. I was hoping and praying that this would make the list because I know that this blew up on TikTok, and this did eventually get picked up by a publisher. This was originally indie published, but this whole series was picked up by a publisher. And this is one of my favorite like actual hate to love romances. I feel like nowadays so many romances are advertised as hate to love or enemies to lovers, but in reality they're more like they slightly dislike each other to lovers. Whereas this, Jules and Josh absolutely hate each other's guts. There's lots of hate sex in this. It's very well done, lots of angst for sure. This is a long book, it's like 500 pages, but I think that we needed that page time for the romance to be believable. There's also quite a few content warnings. I feel like this series, you could say it's almost dark romance just because there's quite a few triggers and content warnings for all of the books in this series, but yeah, this was very well done in my opinion. I always love when I find a true hate to love romance. So if you have more recommendations for romances like this, definitely leave a comment down below. So that is going to be it for either books that I feel should have made the Goodreads Choice Awards for the romance category, or just romances that came out this past year that I have read and absolutely loved. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I would love it if you would leave a comment down below. If you also want to complain about the Goodreads Choice Awards. If there's one thing I love to do, it's complain with people. And if you want to discuss these books that I brought up, I would also love that as well. And I would also love it if you would leave a like and subscribe. And I thank you so much in advance if you do, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!